Climate change, risk analysis, illegal bushmeat hunting, and butterfly diversity in Turkey are some of the topics covered in the December 2013 issue of Conservation Biology. I'm Nate Spillman with the Society for Conservation Biology, and I'm joined by Mark Burgman, the editor of the journal. What I think will garner the most attention from this issue is the special section on climate change. Can you tell us a little bit about this section and why it was included in the issue?
It's about the US Endangered Species Act and climate change and how a regulator needs, or how regulators and how policy and law need to relate to such a difficult issue, the issue of climate change. It's about the US Endangered Species Act, but as several of the papers mention, the general messages are very much an international thing. It's about how regulators and managers and jurisdictions are going to deal with a very complex set of issues. It relates to policy, and it relates to the kinds of scientific tools we're going to need to deploy to get our listings right, to getting our priorities right, getting our actions as effective as we can make them. I think it's novel because it integrates that with the need for policy and regulatory mechanisms to deal with these things. That's what makes this collection of papers interesting. It's I really think they've done a brave thing taking this on. It's a very difficult question, and there's a lot of wisdom in these papers about how one might deploy science in a regulatory environment to achieve conservation outcomes.
Well, moving on to the editorial in this issue. It's an editorial that challenges recent actions by state governments in Australia that the authors say weaken safeguards that are in place to protect Australia's parks, and that it will weaken biodiversity in the country. I was wondering what you had to say about this editorial in the sense that it does take on a political bend, and that it's, challenging the government on their recent policies on conservation.
The focus here is on Australia, and while that's an important component of the global biodiversity, the messages are international. It's not really so much the issue of what one government or another in Australia is doing. It's about the impermanence of conservation reserves. Australia has a long and rich history of protected areas. The first national park proclaimed in Australia was in the late 1800s in the northern Jarrah forests of Western Australia, an initiative of the Australian Academy of Science. That was later overturned. It became a timber reserve. It makes the point that reserves are not permanent, and we need to be vigilant in order to ensure that they continue. They've only been in place a relatively short period of time. Even the oldest of them are 100, 200 years old. That's not very long. And people do look over the fence and see opportunities for mining, for grazing, for urban development, for all sorts of things. And we need to make sure that the reasons, the messages, the imperatives for the creation of these reserves, the visibility of those things is not lost. And I think that's what this editorial is about, really.
The title of the paper is Biodiversity Offsets in the Challenge of Achieving No Net Loss. Can you tell me why you selected this article to be the editor's choice?
Yeah, I think this to me is an issue that will have importance for conservation biology, growing importance for the next decade. The idea of offsets, what makes an offset, what is a reasonable exchange, how to make these exchanges, how to measure and ensure or audit their success. They're all very important topics, and I think we're only just beginning to grapple with them, with the measures that we use, with the way in which we make these transactions. There's a lot of different ways this can be done. And I do think that this is a significant issue. So really it's the potential importance of this issue that led me to this one. There's a bunch of papers I wanted to put as an editor's choice. There's for a lot of different reasons. Maybe we can talk about some of those as well.
One paper that comes to my mind is Barack Pekin's paper on the impact of agricultural chemicals on butterfly diversity in Turkey. They've done a really nice piece of work looking at the relationship between butterfly
assemblages and the distribution of landscape types and environmental variables and pesticide use in the 78 of the 81 provinces in Turkey. And it's a big study. It's used a lot of data. It's used data in a novel way. I think that it's been executed really nicely. The analysis is nicely done, and the finding that much of the variation can be explained, of course, by climate and land cover and all those sorts of things. That's what we expect. But to find a signal, a significant and important signal from the pesticide use, sends an important message to governments, not just in Turkey, of course, but elsewhere, that the impacts of pesticides on the invertebrate fauna is something we often lose sight of, and we need to be much more aware of.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to the diversity column. It's a paper on the role and place of social science in conservation. And I've noticed more and more papers, not necessarily in conservation biology, but in other journals that are talking about the role of social sciences in conservation management, planning, and compliance. Has the journal Conservation Biology seen an uptick in social science related papers? And if so, what type of trends are you seeing there?
Yeah, we have had an increase in contributions that deal with social science over time. It's interesting that some of the papers are written by ecologists who are new to social science and are trying to use social science methods, and occasionally those contributions use those methods naively.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally also we get papers from social scientists that are really about social science, although they treat a conservation biology topic. And it's one of the difficulties of working in a transdisciplinary area. You really need to engage both disciplines in an effective way, and in a way that treats an issue that's relevant to conservation biology. And there are those papers as well. We find papers that are collaborations between social scientists and conservation biologists and ecologists that deliver really very interesting outcomes, very interesting research. We're going to see more of this in the future. The inescapable marriage between human values and biodiversity is not going to go away tomorrow, and people will continue to have an overwhelming impact on biodiversity outcomes. The better we can manage that, the better we can understand that, the more effective we'll be.
Mm-hmm. My first question is, what's the most intriguing paper in this issue of Conservation Biology?
Oh, there were so many. There were lots and lots of good ones. I really liked the paper by Gregory et al., I guess, of all of them, the paper by Gregory et al. In a special issue, where those authors talk about the deployment of structured decision-making for informed and well-considered trade-offs amongst alternative decisions or in alternative conservation investments. I think their approach is refreshing and perhaps the state of the art in terms of how to make good decisions. I would recommend that paper to anybody.
Okay.
The most provocative, I think, is probably the editorial. It really is about a pretty important issue, but it has global implications. The message that conservation reserves are not necessarily permanent features is an important message. Along with the widest potential for impact is probably the paper that we chose for editor's choice. That was really my reason for choosing it. I think it has a wide and important message. It's really in the vanguard of what I hope to be a raft of papers that explore the tools and that deploy these tools in an effective way.
Which paper gets the Burgman thumbs up? The paper you found personally interesting and that you really enjoyed reading?
Yeah, well, I have to admit I am a bit of a methods junkie, and I really like the Nuno paper on drivers of illegal bushmeat hunting. That has a clever, simple, new tool. I hadn't seen it before, but as soon as I read it, I thought, oh my goodness, why haven't I done that before? And it's just a really nice little paper, and I like the message. There's an important message about bushmeat hunting, but the clever trick it's a very simple one, and so it was a delightful paper to read. I recommend that one to everybody as well. That was if I hadn't chosen the offsets paper, I would have chosen the Nuno paper as being the editor's
This is
choice.
the December issue of Conservation Biology. It's available on your SCB member homepage. Just log into your homepage, www.combio.org, and you'll have full, if you're a subscriber, you'll have full access to the issue and all the great papers. Mark, before I let you go, is there anything that you'd like to address with respect to the journal?
Well, we will be implementing the Rising Star feature next year. That, just to remind people, it's about the best paper that we can find by a graduate student, or that is a result of graduate student research in a year, and we'll be looking for that fabulous paper. There are a lot to choose from, of course, so we'll be looking for that next year. There are a lot of changes. I won't tell you about them all now. It'll overwhelm you, but we're thinking about changing the editorial, the way in which we manage papers. We're thinking about changing the representation on the editorial board. I was thinking about changing the way in which we conduct our reviews, but I'll communicate more about that later.
So thanks again, Mark, for joining us. I encourage everybody to log in to their SCB member homepage and to read the latest issue of Conservation Biology. There's a lot of good stuff in this issue.